Bevilacqua, is that how you pronounce
Yeah,
it?
yeah, Bevilacqua.
Bevilacqua. I know that name from The Sopranos. Is it spelled the same?
It is. That character, I think it was Matt Bevilacqua.
Hello, everybody. I am Jason Trost, the host of the Business of Betting podcast. I am joined today by Chris Bevilacqua. He is the CEO and founder of SimpleBet. Thanks very much for joining us today, Chris.
Thanks for having me, Jason.
So why don't we kick off? Why don't you introduce yourself in your own words and introduce SimpleBet in your own words?
Sure. I'm Chris Bevilacqua. I am the co-founder and CEO of SimpleBet, and we are a technology company in the B2B enterprise software technology company in the B2B space. And we've built technology around in-play gaming and in-play wagering and fan engagement. And we sell our technology to consumer-facing businesses pretty much in two verticals, one being the obvious, sports betting vertical, and the other being more broadly in the media and technology distribution vertical.
Great. And I noticed when I was doing your background, I noticed that you were a wrestler at Penn State. Wrestling was my main sport. So, and I saw that you were an All-American. You're in the Hall of Fame, which is very impressive.
Oh, yes. Thanks. So you were a wrestler too. That's awesome.
I'm a fellow Big Tenner. I was a walk-on to the Northwestern team. I got my ass absolutely kicked. I remember, I was pretty good in high school, and I thought, I'll check out this wrestling thing in the Big Ten. And, I joined, and it was like preseason practicing, and I was like, this can't be too bad. So we do a bunch of, I forget what it's called, but you put somebody in your back, and we're running up and down the stadium. I'm like, that's a pretty good workout. That's not too bad. And then we basically, the coach is like, okay, let's go in the indoor stadium, and ended up doing wheelbarrows, which if you don't know what that is, it's somebody holds your legs and you walk up the stadium.
Oh, man, arms. I remember that well, yes.
And I was thinking like, oh my God, when is this ever going to end? It's no joke, Big Ten wrestling. How did you get into wrestling? Is it a family thing, or what was your background in that?
Pretty much. I'm one of six kids, grew up in Massapequa, Long Island. My father was a high school teacher, an educator, and a coach, and he coached wrestling and football and baseball. And I played all sports. And then, I was really a baseball guy, and I ended up, I just wasn't as good a baseball player as I was a wrestler. And when it came time to figure out what I was going to do and what I was going to focus on, wrestling was, sort of more what I was ultimately built for. And, I hurt my shoulder, and I had to have it reconstructed when I was 17 years old. And I was pretty much didn't know I was going to be able to compete. In those days, the surgeries weren't like they are today. So I took almost 2 years off. And luckily at Penn State, had offered me a scholarship to go there, and they honored it. And I ended up redshirting my freshman year and got healthy, and then wrestled for 4 years. And, it started with my father, who was also, not only was a high school coach, but he became the head of the USA wrestling team. So he was like a sort of a bigger wig in the world of amateur wrestling. And we moved out to Oklahoma. I lived in Stillwater, Oklahoma, my junior year of high school, which is where the Hall of Fame was and the headquarters for USA Wrestling, which are now in Colorado Springs.
I'm curious what you think. Like, to me, wrestling was one of the most formative things. There's probably 2 or 3 things I did in my childhood that I think made me what I am. And I chalk wrestling up to being one of the most important things. It taught me so much toughness. You get your face pushed in the mat, day in, day out. And it's a painful, unfun sport, but you have this kind of persistent challenge, which I think really maps really well to the business world. Do you agree with that? Do you think wrestling is good training for the business world?
1,000%. And I tell a story, and I won't go into all the detail around the story, but wrestling changed my life. And there was a specific incident, and I talk about this all the time. I tell my kids, I got 4 young kids, and I always I invoke the name of Mike Langlius. And Mike Langlius, I only know him for 7 minutes of my life. When I was wrestling him in the quarterfinals of the NCAA wrestling tournament in the Meadowlands in New Jersey in my junior year in 1984, right? So that's almost 40 years ago. And, I was beating him 12 or 13, I think it was 12-2, about halfway through the match. And he was one of these guys that he kept coming at me, and he wouldn't give up. He kept diving at me, and he was like a pain in the ass to wrestle. And, we got into a couple of scrambles. He tightened the score. And then at one point, midway through the third period, he dove at me and I fell back over and I felt my ankle pop. And so I was hurt. I was tired. I ultimately end up losing that match 16-15. Now, I would wrestle a guy, Mike Langley, 100 times, and I would win 99 times. And there's only one, and I walked off that mat, and my coach came around. I was underneath the stands in the Meadowlands, and I was like in total shock. And if any, more than anything, I was just embarrassed because there was only one reason, one single reason I lost that match. And that's because I got out competed, which is it's a fancier word to say than I quit. I just stopped. And that became, I looked at my coach, tears coming down my eyes, and I said, that will never fucking happen to me in the rest of my life. And because I know I can control how hard I compete in any aspect of life. Nobody could ever take that away from me or any individual. So if you just don't give up, right, you're going to win most of the time, if not close to all the time. I mean, it was just like the perfect life lesson. And I've used that over the years, and I can tell some stories about how it's worked for me in the world of business. And there's no question that was like a life-changing moment for me.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of the Dan Gable story, where I think he was undefeated until the championship match of his senior year, loses that match, stunned, he gets stunned, and then goes on to be one of the best Olympic wrestlers that has ever
Oh
existed.
yeah.
Didn't have,
Yep.
so you got Dan Gabled, in other words, and
Exactly. 100%. And like Gable, like you just said, he went on to wrestle in the 72 Olympics and didn't have a single point scored on him. Beat the Russians. They're like, he became obviously, folklore of amateur wrestling and American wrestling.
yeah, it's and the other important lesson I took away personally from wrestling was that whenever you were as tired as you ever possibly could imagine, there was always more in the tank. There's some switch that you can switch in your brain to tell yourself, I'm actually not tired. I have more energy, and you think you're at 100, but you're really at 80. And I found that such an important lesson in life, that you can always work harder, that there's always more to give. And, I feel like all these people that don't wrestle or be in these hyper competitive situations, they don't learn these skills. And I think it's such an important life skill to kind of go through this adversity.
Yep. 100%. I'm right with you.
So let's pivot back to the business world. So I had a search. You work in an investment company. You have a background in media. Can you give a few minutes on your career after Penn State?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I told you earlier, I had that shoulder surgery, and then my senior year in the NCAAs, I ripped out my arm again, and that was it. I had to go get reconstructed again, and the doc's like, "You're done," because I had really built my career. I thought I was going to go on to compete in the Olympics because I was on the ladder, top three in my weight class, and I thought, I'm going to go at it in '88, which was Seoul, then probably more likely '92 was Barcelona. So when I realized I was done, I was like, I wasn't ready to figure out what my career was. So I spent about, maybe a year or so. I had to get the surgery and get rehab, and I ended up working with my father at a sporting goods store and tried to sort out my life and figure out what I want to do. And I decided early on that I just wanted to stay in the sports business. So I got a business degree at Penn State, but I didn't know exactly what. And I had somebody introduce me to a guy at NBC, right? This guy, Gray Siemens, who was at the time the director of sports research. So I went in, I saw him, he introduced me a couple people, and I ended up getting some, work, kind of you know, hourly work at NBC Sports Promo. Where those are the guys that make, on Sunday, the Jets are playing the Patriots. Tune in at 4 o'clock, watch on NBC. Like we'd make those 30-second commercials. And I got into, working there in like an hourly, I got paid $6 an hour, and I was working like 50 hours a week. And on the weekends, that was kind of sitting in a studio room and making the actual commercials. And then I ended up working at live remotes. I'd go work for like ABC or ESPN for boxing and, college football, what have you, being a runner. And I really started to learn about how live television, how television was produced. And after a couple of years of that, I realized, I'm really more interested in the programming side of the business, more like the business affairs side. And I ended up moving into NBC in programming for a couple of years. And then after that, after a couple of years of programming, I knew that, I wanted to be on the commercial side of the business. And I ended up getting an opportunity to go work at Major League Baseball. And I got hired to sell corporate sponsorship at Major League Baseball. And I did that for a few years. And during that time, we took the rights back in house. And then I went to what was the first of its kind baseball network. Like, we actually created a baseball network. NBC and ABC were our distribution partners, and we produced and sold all of the national network telecasts. And then right at the tail end of that was like in the early 90s, 94, there was the baseball strike. You might be too young to remember the 94
I
strike.
remember it.
So,
that's when I stopped being a baseball fan, actually.
A lot of people did for a short time. And then I left there to go to Nike, and Nike was looking for somebody. This was in 94, late 94, early 95. And, a lot of people won't remember that Nike was just a little old $3 billion a year footwear company in those days. And they were very pro athlete, anti-establishment. And they were looking for somebody that had a lot of experience working with the professional leagues in the US, because they were moving into the apparel business, where they were going to have more formal relationships with the leagues. And they put me in New York as that guy to go deal with the MLB and NBA and NFL and NHL and MLS and so forth, and create all these commercial relationships across licensing and marketing. And that really was sort of what supercharged my relationships across the whole entire industry, because I ultimately became the global negotiations director. So I was like the deal guy for Nike. So I would go out and do all of our big athlete deals, or go do our NFL. And I ultimately got into, the college side of the business. And because we were, not confident that we could convince the leagues to give us all these rights, because this was like when we were fighting with David Stern doing all the Michael Jordan stuff, and Stern was like, so there was all that uncertainty. And we said, all right, we can't get on the field on Sundays, meaning NFL. We better own Saturdays. So I literally spent 2 years flying around the country, meeting all the athletic directors and commissioners and saying, we're going to dominate college sports. And so that's when we started doing all these head to toe deals with all these major universities. So we got a few years into all that. And at the tail end of that, in the late 90s, I said to Phil Knight, I said, we got all these rights in college. And my media background, right, was I knew there was like a 500 channel universe coming with the build out of digital cable and, the internet. This was like the late 90s. I said, Nike should start a 24-hour college sports TV network. At the time, there was the Food Network existed. Like, if somebody could make a 24-hour channel around food, we ought to be able to do it around college sports. So Phil and Tom Clark, who was the president, by the way, Penn State grad, and Howard Slusher, who was kind of my mentor, I had this little plan. And Phil said, I remember sitting in the room, he said, we don't sell TV. This might be a great idea. We sell shoes and clothes. That's what we do. So I just decided, you know what? I've just spent the last 12 or 13 years really learning about a business. I learned how to produce it. I learned how to program it. I learned how to sell it. I learned how to market it. I want to go be an entrepreneur. So I literally left probably the greatest job in the world for, at the time, early 30, I was 31, 32 years old. And I said, I'm going to go give this a whack. So I ended up spending the next year on my own dime, flying around the country, meeting with all these commissioners and athletic directors and presidents that I'd gotten to know. And I said, here's the deal. You guys are in a one bidder marketplace called ESPN. And what you need to do, if you ever want to unlock the value of your intellectual property and of your media rights, you're going to have to create an alternative to ESPN. And I can do that for you. And here's how I'm going to do it. And they said, sure, Chris. I mean, we'd love to support you doing that. So, and it was at that point that I partnered up with these two other guys, Brian Beadall and Steve Greenberg, who had previously built Classic Sports Network, and they sold that to ESPN. It was called ESPN Classic. Because I knew I didn't have the background. I knew the college world, but I didn't know the cable distribution world, and I certainly didn't know how to raise, equity and private equity and venture money. So the three of us started the company in the early 2000s. We raised about $110 million of private equity and venture funding, launched what was called college sports television in the early 2000s. And then we literally, less than 5 years to the day we started it, we sold it to CBS. It's now called the CBS Sports Network. And after that, I said, I don't want to be an operator anymore. I want to tell people how to do it, and I'll advise them. So I opened up my own business. It was a sports media advisory investing firm. That was in 2009 or 10. I still have that business. And so I was on the other side advising sellers, sitting opposite of ESPN and Comcast and Fox, and telling my clients how to maximize the sale of their media rights. And I still have that business. And then, of course, 5 years ago, I had this crazy idea with a couple of partners to start a technology company in the sports betting world. So that's how I got it.
Before we get to sports betting, I'm really curious what you think about the future of sports, because I think on one hand, it's no secret that linear television's dying, and, Netflix and all the other options that people have. And live sports is the one thing that, brings people together. In America, it's on every restaurant and bar, it seems like, has sports on. It's really part of the culture. It's one of the big things that, live entertainment is one of the big enduring businesses in the new media landscape. So on one hand, I think you have a lot of momentum to, like, for live sport to be bigger and bigger and bigger. On the other hand, I think the new generation, I was talking to somebody at lunch the other day who's 22, 23 years old, and they don't watch movies anymore because movies are too long. It blew my mind. But the fact that somebody can't sit down for 90 minutes to watch a movie it's the new reality. And I imagine that the new generation, they're used to things in 30-second bursts and will not have attention to sit through a 2.5-hour baseball game and watch ads and all these kinds of things. So you have these kind of two opposing forces of, the attention span is getting shorter and shorter, which I don't think maps very well to the way American sports are done. And on the other hand, it's still quite a big business, and people center themselves around live sport. Where do you see the future of professional sport? Do you see it growing, shrinking, staying the same?
Oh, no, I think sports is going to grow and grow dramatically. And I think a lot of it is due to, the combination of things that you just, raised, which is, we're moving from what I would describe as kind of a wholesale business model, right? Where in the media world, right, where you built a foundation around a 2 or 3 hour broadcast of a game, and then you would take those rights and you'd sell them to a wholesaler, right, like a Fox or an ESPN, and then the Fox or ESPN would sell it to a retailer like Comcast or DirecTV, and it would get distributed, and then it would be sort of exclusively walled off inside of that universe. But now you have technology, right, that, like you just said, that is now available. It's ubiquitous, high-speed access. You can get video pretty much anywhere, and it's shrunk the world. It's actually made it more accessible for anybody to watch anything at any time. So we're moving from what used to be like a wholesale model into what I would describe as more of a hybrid wholesale retail model. And really, the center of that is personalization. So there's definitely across the range, that spectrum of, there is a segment that would sit down and, like maybe you and I would do, and watch a 2 or 3 hour sporting event, because that's sort of the way we grew up. Then you go to the total opposite end of the spectrum, and I have a pretty good focus group, right? I've got four kids between the ages of 11 and 16. And to your point, like, yeah, they don't sit down and watch 2 or 3 hours of anything ever. But could you convince them to watch, 20 seconds of this or 3 minutes of that or 5 or 10 minutes of this? That's what they do, right? So what's now, like, in real time getting re-architected, right? Almost like building the plane while it's flying, is, the untethering of the old model into a much more flexible model that again, at the center of it is personalization. So everybody could get whatever they want, whenever they want it, in whatever form they want it, right? The friction will get removed out of getting access to the content that you like and what how you enjoy consuming it and where you enjoy consuming it. Much of it, obviously, now moving to mobile. So I think at the center of that transformation, right, like any other new technology, going all the way back to AM radio, and then you went to black and white TV, to color TV, to cable TV, to the internet, to now mobile. Sports has always been the tip of the spear, right? So I think ultimately the same thing is happening again in real time. And now, we're in a global world, and, whoever navigates that as the owners of the IP the most efficiently, right? And the big brands matter, right? So the world is sort of bifurcating into, must have content and nice to have content, right? And so you can pretty much, even the layman sort of can get to, like, where do you draw the line between must have and nice to have? And the must have is only getting more valuable. And that's how I see it.
So I totally agree with you that the whenever, however aspect is going to continue. That opens up a lot of new avenues. To me, I think, and I'm curious to get your perspective, because I think sports betting intersects with this. And I promise we'll get to sports betting on the sports betting podcast. But I don't know what the numbers off the top of my head, but I think the Big Ten network makes $1 billion or something a year for the Big Ten schools. I think NFL's $5 to $10 billion a year, or something like that, in that range. To me, the elephant in the room is, like, your kids might be a good example. Like, they will consume, Judge hitting a home run, but they don't want to pay for it. They want to watch it for free. And the old model of the billions of dollars of ad spending is gone, isn't it? What's going to replace the sort of traditional linear television, very heavily ad supported model?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way that those rights were sold, right, were based on selling those exclusive 2 and 3 hour broadcasts. And while there'll still be a segment that wants to watch it that way, I think flexibility is getting built into the system. And so if like, a lot of it is just has to do, like, in the advertising world, right? And it's a dual model, right? Subscription and advertising. And I think that'll be the case going forward, whether it's in linear TV or even in mobile and, like, subscription-based live programming. But there's no reason why you can't do it similarly. Like, look what Elon Musk is trying to do with Twitter, right? He's got this huge audience. They tried before he got there to, take advertising and make money in the programmatic side. That didn't work. Now they just hired a good old friend, Linda Yaccarino, by the way, who went to Penn State with me. Linda now CEO. And they have this massive audience. And
I'm going to start name dropping Wildcats here pretty soon. Like, Seth Meyers. Okay, go ahead.
They have this massive audience, right? And none of whom watches for 2 or 3 hours at a time. They're all watching it 2 or 3 minutes at a time. So you have to figure out, and I'm pretty confident they will, how to bring brand advertising back into that environment. And there's no more safe brand, right, than live sports, right? Like the Yankees and the NFL and what have you. And they just have to figure out the right way to monetize what should be a sizable audience, even if they're only watching 2-3 minutes at a time.
Okay, sports betting. So what's the itch you were trying to scratch? Talk to me about why you founded SimpleBet. What were you trying to do in the market?
Yeah, listen, I did not get into this. My two other co-founders, Joey Levy and Scott Marshall. Scott was a former partner with me at CSTV 20 years ago. And so he brought Joey to me, and, I didn't know anything about sports betting. And when they came with me and Joey came out of the daily fantasy business, he explained to me, and I said, all right, this is great, but, like, what do you want from me? And he said, well, we'd like your money and your access. Because I've been around a long time. I know a lot of people in the industry, and they had a whole thesis around the U.S. market. And this was all pre-PASPA, by the way. So I said, all right, let me figure out, like, if there's something to do here. And of course, I went back to all my folks at the leagues, and I said, Chris Christie's suing you. Like, do you really want this to happen? Like, I didn't know. And so I was coming out of it with the media lens. I mean, obviously, I know that anybody that bets on a game is going to watch that game longer. And the currency in the media world is attention, is engagement, right? So I knew it from that angle, but I certainly didn't know it from a bettor's angle because I'm not a bettor. Like I don't bet on sports. So I just thought that there was a business opportunity here because of the inefficiency of how sports betting worked as I learned a little bit about it. And what was clear to me was that if and when it was ever legal in the US, there was going to be a huge opportunity. So, always in the world of better to be lucky than smart, we founded the company in April of 2018. And what happened 30 days later? Boom, PASPA got repealed. And, that's sort of how I got into it. And I didn't imagine I was going to be the CEO, right? I just helped put the company together, raise the money, and then it turned out like any other startup, shit hits the fan. And I thought, oh man, not only do I have a lot of my own money in this, I've got all my colleagues and friends' money in this. I better make this work. And so that's when I stepped in to be the CEO. It wasn't planned that way. And, being a wrestler, right, you got to be mentally tough. And this is a super hard business, very complicated, the way data works. I mean, ultimately at the heart of it, not only we're a tech company, we're a data company. And there's all kinds of issues around how data is collected and distributed, and the leagues are involved and regulators are involved. I mean, it is a super complicated business with lots of sharp elbows, and it takes some fortitude to do this.
So talk to me about the product that you have and how you make your money.
So we built this technology, and our thesis from the very beginning was U.S. sports were going to be much different than international sports and European sports, where gambling had been legal for a couple of decades. And the centerpiece for our thesis was in play. That in U.S. sports, the cadence of U.S. sports, like games like baseball and football and even basketball, are much more available for all the in-game incidents that get created during the game. So, like, in other words, pitches and at bats and plays and drives and shots and possessions, all the things that were endemic to US sports, we saw as a huge opportunity for in-play wagering. And if we could build the technology that enabled that, because it didn't exist, that we would have something special. So we spent the first couple of years building that technology, and the essence of it is taking lots of historical data and then building the necessary mechanics. And that's really where the sauce is for us. And we've patented our technology, which it's the automation required to create a market, suspend a market, reprice a market, and result a market, all through automation. And we do it with historical data and then the real-time incident feed that comes out of the stadiums and arena. So those things put together, no one had ever built before. It took us a couple of years, and now we've got it out there. We just turned 5 years old last month, and we're way ahead of anybody else with this technology. So we license that technology to consumer-facing operators like DraftKings and Bet365 and Caesars are among our customers today. And we drive volume through there, and we take a piece of the NGR as our business model.
And who would you say your competitors are, and how are you different than them?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, we don't there's no one that can do what we do at the scale that we do it. There are companies that offer technology that around, say, like player props, like is Pat Mahomes going to throw for more than 280 and a half yards in this game? But that is a market that stays up for 3 hours and doesn't result to the end of the game. Whereas our technology is Pat Mahomes going to throw for more than 9 yards on this next pass? And we do that for all 60 of his passes in a game, among many other markets, right? And so nobody can do that at scale. So there's companies like Swish Analytics and Angstrom and sports.io that have versions of that, but nowhere near what we had over 10 or 12 million markets that we created and resulted across our 5 sports. We do NBA, NFL, MLB, college football, college basketball, and we're about to add a couple of new offerings as we go forward. So I think the fact that we're at scale and we do it and we've got results and it's battle tested, and we drove over $1 billion of volume last year. We'll probably double that this year, right? And we're about now some of our key customers. We're about 35% now of their live in-play handle or our micro markets. I mean, that's a massive business. It's a multi-billion-dollar TAM already, and we're still in top of the second inning here.
And can you give me like an example market that you do that nobody else does?
Like right now, I'll give you one in baseball, right? And baseball is great because it's the sport that we have that is the highest volume. So like we'll do an at bat markets, right? We have, some pretty popular markets. What's going to happen with Aaron Judge in this at bat? Single, double, triple, home run, hit, out, other, right? So we offer these 7 or 8 sided markets, which are a very popular market. But in the pitch level markets, right? And now the pitch clocks, 15, 20-second pitch clocks, right? Probably our second or third most bet on market is Garrett Cole's next pitch going to be above 96.5 miles an hour or higher? Yes or no? So nobody can do that. That's, like we offer that market every night across every game and every pitcher.
In that market, for example, if you have 20 seconds between pitchers, how do you manage getting the data, setting the price, sending it to the bookmaker, taking the bet all before the pitch is thrown?
That's the sauce, my friend. So we get a live incident feed from the stadium, right?
Is that your guy in the stadium, or are you licensing that?
We get that from Sport Radar, which is MLB's data provider. In the case of the NFL, that's Genius. And we get that feed, and we get it typically under a second. And we get a signal in that feed that says when the pitcher's foot hits the rubber, it says pitcher ready. The market closes, right? Then the pitch is thrown, probably less than a second later. And then the result is ball or strike. And we get that all in under a second. So we're only closing the market for about a second and a half. And then we reopen the market before the next pitch. So even if what used to be last year was a 22-second window, you're now somewhere between 17 and 20 seconds this year because of the new rules. And we haven't seen any degradation in the volume in the pitch markets. And the reason for that is that we have technology that maximizes the uptime. So we keep the window open as long as possible so that a user can get a bet in.
And in the case of DraftKings, I mean, please don't answer if it's confidential, but are you acting as the role of the bookmaker, or do you send the price to DraftKings and they are the bookmaker?
Yeah, we just send them the probability feeds and they do their own margining strategy on top of it.
So you send them a zero line, to speak, and then they add their own margin. Got it. Now, what happens? I mean, as somebody that's worked with sports data companies for years and years, they fuck up all the time. So how do you handle those cases? Like when the guy falls asleep or his girlfriend calls him yelling at him and he's not sending you the pitcher signal within 1 second of the.
Well, that's all automated from in this case, Radar, right? So there's somebody in the stadium. It's not our employee. It's a Radar employee.
But I mean, they're fallible humans, which will send you bad data from time to time.
You now have hit on a very, very important point. And it really is, I mentioned earlier, we have a patent on our technology. And the key feature in the patent is it's called a method patent with game state data correction. So it's a software that recognizes that, in all of these data feeds, the chain of custody always has human beings. So there are going to be mistakes. So one that we see quite often is a scout in the stadium in an NFL. It's 1st and 10 on the Jets 20. And no, it's really 1st and 10 on the Patriots 20. And our software immediately recognizes that and self-corrects it and allows for the market to stay open. Otherwise, you'd have to just shut the market down, right? So at rejections, markets are closed down. And that's what we've maximized for. Like our data or our software self-corrects those kind of mistakes.
And which I'm sure probably is effective, but still mistakes will get through. I'm curious, like, does DraftKings shoulder that, or I guess you guys, it would just come out in the wash if you're doing something?
Yeah, like our model is NGR, so our product has to work and create profits in order for us to get paid. And I can confidently tell you, after 2 years and almost a couple $1 billion, we've done quite well. So it's worked.
Yeah, but there's always those people that find the issue, find the edge cases and can systemically pick you off
Yeah,
under
but
this and that.
yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's people trying all the time, but thus far, we've been able to, our margins, we're at, probably 8.5, 9% margins, whole percentages. So it over the course of all that volume, yeah, there's probably one or two where you get beat on the edge cases, but the vast majority is doing quite well.
So if you think about this long term, do you think that either DraftKings will start doing this? I'm using DraftKings as an EG, not as a, just as a stand-in for somebody in the ecosystem. But do you think these customers of yours will ever do it themselves, or, the Bet Radar, Bet Geniuses of the world will do it themselves?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is everybody says that. And I know going back 5 years to starting, and again, I didn't know much about anything. And I learned about along the way about product roadmaps and engineering resources and insourcing of tech and all that, like all the stuff that you hear in the sales cycles. And you realize that, like it took us, I mean, we're 5 years into this. Like, this is super complicated, hard stuff to build. And it's way easier said than done. And every conversation that we had with every customer that we now have all started like that. Well, we're going to do this ourselves. All right, well, have at it. And they got 50 other things that they prioritized. And, we're at the point now where that's not an issue anymore, because even if, say, FanDuel or DraftKings said, we're going to do this ourselves, I can tell you it's going to cost them well over $100 million to build, and it's going to take them 3 or 4 years to do it. And by now, like, we're already years ahead of anyone. Like, by the time they get to where we are today, we're going to be 3 years more ahead on the technology.
Yeah. What's the makeup of your team, and how much money did you guys raise?
So we just had our annual offsite the last couple of days. So we now have 108 people. We're in town. We were doing all of our stuff. And heavy investment in technology and engineering, a lot of machine learning engineers, data scientists. That's probably a good 60% of the team. And then we have a pretty robust trading operation, and data operation, and then of course product and ops in general, and then small admin staff.
And are you guys remote, or do you guys go into an office?
We have an office. We're right in Manhattan on Park Avenue. We don't have you have to be in an office policy, but I go in there pretty regularly. And, there's probably half the company is based out of the New York or kind of close to New York area. And we're pretty spread out after that. So we have a lot of our machine learning engineers are remote.
And when you're founding the company, I'm always curious, because I've only done a B2C company, and B2B actually never crossed my mind. But did B2C ever come up to you? Did you think, if we have the magic data, why don't we just do the magic platform and go straight to the consumer?
As a matter of fact, that's sort of where we made our mistake in the beginning. And like I said earlier, you make mistakes. One of the mistakes we made was we were trying to be the jack of all trades and the master of none. We were trying to be a B2B company and a B2C company. And my co-founder, Joey Levy, his original vision was to be in the B2C side. But as we started to build that, we realized the technology didn't exist. So we had to build the enabling technology in order to do it, right? So we were, and I became convinced very early on, and again, we've raised $80 million to date, which is, is still a lot of money in and of itself. But like, I knew early on, like, if you want to be in the B2C business, that's like hundreds of millions of dollars, customer acquisition. Like, that's a game I'm not playing, not with my money. And so that's where we doubled down. And, and Joey, to his credit, was, very helpful and instrumental in helping us build it out. But he always had the hankering to be in the B2C business. And so as a part of our Series C, he helped bring in our Series C lead funder, which was Anti-Fund and Jake Paul. But as a part of that whole transaction, he exited SimpleBet and started his own direct-to-consumer company with Jake Paul called Better, right? And Jake and Joey are building Better, and we are their technology platform. So, and we actually are equity holders in Better. So it ultimately ended up being that, but we just separated into two different companies now.
Got it. And did you guys build vanilla sports book software, or is that kind of or you're not entering that business?
Well, if what you mean is, did we build like the
The
platform?
single.
Yeah,
Did you have a betting platform now?
yeah. So we do, like I said a second ago, we are the technology platform end to end for Better.
Got it.
So that platform, we have one customer so far. That's Better, but now we're looking for more customers with that platform.
So that's more the Canby model,
Yeah.
turnkey, do the whole
Yep.
kit and caboodle. Got it. So what's next for you guys?
Man, we're right at a very critical juncture now, entering, so everything, like I learned 5 years ago, launches off of the NFL season. So every year the cycle, and everybody sort of scrambles around to get ready, and we're right in that zone now for the next 100 days. All these new products, all these new pieces of innovation are going to come, and we're now adding some new sports, but we're also adding new offerings to our existing sports. So like in baseball, we just launched same inning parlay, right? So same game parlays over here, FanDuel, a big deal on the product side. But now we're taking that same concept of instant gratification and we're bringing it into micros. So Aaron Judge is up. He's going to hit the sixth pitch of this inning for a home run, more than 400 feet. So you take like, the parlay concept and you put it into instant gratification, and long odds, kind of like instant gratification with lottery type odds. Like that's really super cool. Same thing for NFL, same drive parlays, like that kind of stuff. So I think you're going to see a lot of new innovation, and all built off of the coming NFL and college football seasons.
Awesome. Well, before I let you go, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Well, I'm 59, about to have my 60th birthday. And so much of my growing up has already been done. But, listen, I like doing hard stuff. This has definitely been, even though, as I said earlier, I'm not a sports betting, I don't have a sports betting background, but what really attracted me is this was very disruptive. There's a lot of like entrenched incumbents, and it's always fun to, mess with the status quo. And I've had a lot of fun doing that. And if I could find something else when I grew up to do something that's disruptive like this, something somewhere else, that would be really cool too.
Awesome. Well, thanks very much for stopping by, Chris.
All right. Yep. Thanks very much, dude.
Okay. Cheers.